This meeting is being recorded and or transcribed.
Okay, we're recording.
Excellent. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the West Haven Subcommittee of the Municipal County Review Board for Tuesday, January 5th. We have a rather robust agenda today, so I'm going to call our meeting to order, and we do not have any opening remarks. Our efforts today focus on audit updates, policy procedures and internal control, corrective action measures and plans, as well as an update on the ARPA plan. So we will go ahead and get started. Next up will be the approval of the minutes for January 25th, 2022. Through motion, please.
So moved, Tom Hamilton.
Thanks, Tom.
Except from the minutes.
Yeah, right here.
Right next to me.
Great, been moved and seconded. Are there any edits?
But I'm not seeing anybody else's camera.
It's just easier, okay? When it comes. Hey, friend.
All right, seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. And any opposed? Great, none, okay. So our minutes are approved. Right, we're going to move right on to the city credit card policy and procedures, which is our third item on the agenda. As many of you know, in the past, you are no longer muted. For discussion concerning the city's credit card usage policy, it did come up with respect to recent communications from the chief of staff and ensuring that receipts are received. During that council meeting, however, it did come to our attention that there were some concerns pertaining to the lack of policy and procedure, or the robustness, if you will, of a policy and procedure, as well as how the city is currently utilizing this credit card in a way that we want to ensure we are preventing fraud, misuse, or those sorts of actions. With that said, I want everyone to be aware publicly on our MARB board, because of those concerns and in light of the significant work we're doing with West Haven on policies and procedures and audits are underway. I did direct Ms. Kennison to reach out to Mayor Rossi to request that credit card be shut down until we can address the policy for the immediate term. And then obviously as we move into our corrective action plans, there are discussions pertaining to implementing a key card policy. So for today, we're going to ask Mayor Rossi and her team to please present the policy that is currently in place, and we'll have an opportunity to give feedback thereafter and talk about next steps. So Mayor Rossi, turning it over to you, please.
I don't even need to. Just watch it. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes?
We can, yes,
okay.
Thank you.
So I actually have my executive assistant, Louis Esposito, here with me, and he can go over it more in depth, but I did send our written policies and procedures to everyone last week. And again, if there's anything more you want us to do. I do want to say one thing, though, that was mentioned that I think sounded the alarm, if you will, and that it made it sound like everybody has this credit card number written on a piece of paper and they can charge at will. And I'll have Mr. Esposito go further into that, but that's not the way that it works. People are not writing it down on different papers and this and that, and because that would be a problem, a big problem. So I'm going to have him go through, I'm going to change seats with him because I have so much food, but I'm going to be sitting like right over here. It won't go any further. I can turn it like that. How's that? Is that
good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Louis Esposito is the mayor's executive assistant to the staff. I've been managing this credit card since we've taken office back in 2017. We put a lot of measures in place. We've had other credit cards out there, and the credit card that we have had has been the only credit card within the city.
Mr. Esposito, could you please speak up a little bit? I can't really hear you, I apologize.
Here.
I'm sorry.
How's that?
Since we took office in 2017, there were other credit cards out there which are no longer in use. There's only one credit card for the entire city, which goes through me. So anyone who wants to purchase anything must contact me and let me know what the charges are for, and then I will either tell them, okay, go forward with it, and then we charge that particular line item, whether on their budget, whichever department is requesting use of the credit card. We've had problems in getting receipts. That's what generated that last email we were spending too much time chasing down receipts where people would forget to turn them in, or they were late getting them from the vendor. So we created a form now that they have to fill out the form, who they're purchasing from, what line item the expenditure is coming out of, and what the approximate use is going to be. And we just put that form in place the past month or two. But prior to that, everyone was calling me, but the problem was they were not turning in the receipts in a timely fashion. And that made more work for me and for the finance department, because I had to track down every receipt after that. Sometimes it would take me many hours between myself and the finance department. But all the receipts were always turned in eventually, but I didn't like the fact that I was waiting sometimes for weeks for them.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. So I understand that your recent communication to department heads was on the basis of the delays in getting receipts. But if I could ask a clarifying question, is it in fact true that the city does have one credit card with one credit card number, and that when the department head requests to utilize the card to make a purchase, and after they complete the form, that they must have somewhere recorded the credit card number that is on file for the city? So therefore, you have multiple departments that have one card number that they're utilizing. Is that correct? Or are you directly making all purchases for the city on their behalf?
No, the purchase is made by them, but it was my authorization only. They can't just use the card without notifying me. And it's a prior authorization use of it, and then we tell them, okay, go ahead and use the card. Sometimes if we're out and we can use a card in person, we do, but sometimes a lot of the sales are made over the internet. A lot of the vendors at the police department or the personnel department, even the corporation council, they have to order books or training manuals and whatever they need, and they have to pay for them before they'll ship them to us. They will not accept a PO, and we could send them a check.
So I will start with my comments and open it up for the other members who are here today. One, understand that organizations, they do need to make purchases that can not only occur through a PO process or emergencies do come up. What I heard you say is that there's one card number that is being utilized by multiple departments. Yes, there's a pre-setting, if you will, for approval, but there's no control system-wide that would prevent a department, number one, for making the purchase without your approval. Number two, it means that this one card number is being shared throughout multiple departments. In order to have a robust, sound credit card policy, there are a number of elements that need to be in place. Number one, the policy that we received today is by no means robust. It's not even signed and dated. Typically, you want to have one card number to each user. You set thresholds on what is the maximum amount that that particular department or that individual can spend. The commodities that they could purchase would also be controlled within that credit card. So, I mean, as we look at more robust policies, I'd say that this policy, quite frankly, is so far from protecting you, if you will, from misuse, and that's what you want the policy to accomplish. So it is not just you have a procedure for requesting, but it is ensuring that as purchases are made, we know who made that purchase, it's controlling how much they can spend, it's ensuring that when they need service, that it is properly deactivated. That is what a robust policy would actually entail. What's in place here for the city of Hartford right now does not protect you against any particular abuse. It's a policy that needs to be extremely expanded. And at this point, I'd recommend that only one person, until you're able to implement a P-card program, have access to a credit card. We can talk about what the next steps look like. But the document that you put in front of me from my 20 plus years of experience does not resemble a robust policy that protects you against any potential abuse. I want to open it up for other MARB members to comment on the policy that is included in the package today.
Madam Chair, Steve Esposito.
Yes, sir.
Am I being recognized?
Oh, yes, you are. You have the floor.
Again, and I know that these are all I know the intentions are great, but it just seems to me that each month we come back to the same table and we find a new event taking place. This month it's the credit cards. The level of control, in my view, is limited in numerous aspects. We had the same, if I remember correctly, when I first came on, there was an issue with something at the hockey rink, kind of the same thing. So there's a theme here that seems to be a problem. And I'm actually very impressed with what OPM is doing, because through the controls that OPM is instilling, it seems that a lot of these issues are coming to light. And I applaud OPM for what they're doing. And it just seems to me that as a board member and meeting just once a month, though I know OPM is actively participating with the West Haven, I really think at some point this board needs to take a good, honest look at the level that we are participating in trying to represent the people of the state of Connecticut who continue to afford West Haven the ability to draw money. I think at some point we're going to have to increase our level of participation. I know we're at tier 3 now, but I think we need to look at more stringent ways of helping West Haven achieve some of the goals they're trying to accomplish, which is fiscal responsibility. I think many of these issues that are taking place now with credit cards are just policies and procedures that are just not getting straightened out fast enough in my eyes. So that's my view.
Okay. You're still on mute.
There. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Mr. Esposito, for the explanation of the procedure. To echo Mr. Cosigno's point, there often are common themes to the observations that we've directed to city officials month after month. I recall the discussion around the purchasing function generally and the notion of accountability that needs to be made clear to department heads. And my question about accountability with respect to this policy, Mr. Esposito, you expressed that there have been times when you really had to house individuals for the documentation that's required. Are there any consequences? In other words, are there decisions made to withhold the use of the credit card to those who fail to adhere to the policies as the city has stated?
Yes, as was stated in my last email to them, it was going to be a final warning to them. In the future, if the receipts are not passed through me within 24 to 48 hours, then there would be I would revoke their privileges to use a credit card going forward. But in my 4+ years of handling the credit card, I do want to say one thing. There has not been one instance of fraud on our part of the credit card. Every charge that's been made has been made by a city department for the city function. There's been no personal use of the credit card by anyone. There's been no fraudulent use by anyone within the city, to my knowledge, of using the credit card. There's always a possibility of outside vendors being a little unscrupulous and taking our number and then charging something off on it and trying to get by with it. We've caught that by the fact that we monitor the card every month. We look at the charges and we justify what charges went to whom. We find any charges that are not sustainable or able to justify, then I would notify the credit card company, which I have in the past, and the card was canceled because it was fraudulent use from the opposite end, not from our end at the city, but by a vendor who wanted to take advantage of the city credit card. But I got to reiterate, and there was some mention by Mr. Falcone about something at the hockey rink. That would not be the city credit card anyway. That would be the Board of Ed credit card.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to just underscore and echo my support for Secretary McCaw's comments about the necessity to really just get up to best practices, to ensure that the city's expenditures are in line with just commonly accepted governmental practice. I don't disagree with what Mr. Felsigno has described as the need for greater MARB involvement, but I, for one, I think the reason why MARB exists and why this heightened oversight is in place is so that the city can get its fiscal house in order and return to independence. I mean, that to me is the goal. I don't think that MARB oversight ad infinitum is the solution here. And so I think that I know many will join me in very much looking forward to the results of the audit, which in addition to shedding light on specific concerns that are within the accountant's review, that there will be some articulation of general standards and a path forward for the city to tighten its financial affairs. And so I look forward to the update that will be coming in the meeting, but yeah, there are kind of accepted best practices, and the city should look to implementing those as soon as possible. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Christine. And if I could, I please be sure that you have not had any issues of abuse. But if the system does not protect against that, that is the issue. The policy, the procedure, and the use of the system are to prevent against that. And if you have directors that have written down this credit card number, and that's how they make purchases after you sign off through this form, and if you tell them no, there's nothing stopping them. A P-card program would have a unique identifiable number for Jane Doe, and you'd be able to go in and deactivate. Those are the types of protections that you want to have, and so I do concur with Ms. Shaw that you need to take this from an antiquated system to the modern day best practices for managing purchasing. To protect the city so that there could not be, and we can eliminate risk of abuse. Kim Paxton.
Yes, Secretary. A couple other things that are missing from this policies and procedures is there is no list as far as what is allowable expenses within a credit card, what is not allowable expenses. And I think that is quite important when you're dealing with controls, as well as proper sign-off of the individuals. When you use such a credit card, that you have a responsibility to adhere to those rules and regulations, policies and procedures of the city. And you don't have any of that type of control put in place here with your process. I will say that the one thing that is a red flag to me is to hear that this policy was just written down about a month or two ago, which meant that we didn't have anything in place prior to that. And that means that we went with some years without policies and procedures. And I know that we lack in policies and procedures, but it is another area that definitely needs to be shored up. So, Secretary, I do think the best thing of shutting it down and making sure that controls go in play was the right thing to do.
Thank you so much. Kim, Bob, I see you have your hand up, sir.
Yeah, first I want to thank Pat for, doing the link to that, and I actually listened to it, and, I'm one that's always looking for green shoots, and I was very pleased with the council's response and their emphasis on accountability. I'm wondering that everything that we're hearing is the department heads aren't doing this, they're not doing that. I do know, and I hope this is still true, that the Cone Resnick is looking not only at what happened with Mr. DeMassa, but also whether there's anything else going on with different departments, because we've heard about pushback, and that's a red flag to me about accountability. But I'm just wondering, how many department heads are there? Do we have their names? I don't want to get into personnel matters, but because it just seems that middle management isn't playing ball. To Christine's point about the city being kind of looking out for best practices. With all due respect, the city doesn't have a clue about best practices, and it's only because of, MARB and OPM's persistent hounding on, well, we got the accountants, what are you doing about the audit findings? What are you doing about this, that? And I think we're slowly getting them to do best practices. I guess the issue is we need to focus a little bit on what's being done to hold accountability. I know the council was just thought a couple of heads ought to roll to do that. That's not our, that's not our bailiwick, but I do think we ought to get reports about what steps are being taken for accountability, because that's not happening.
Thank you, Matt. Any other remarks from our subcommittee board members?
Yes, Madam Chair, Paddington.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
My question is so this policy has been in place for 30, 60 days. Two questions as it states that. Been any misuse in the sense of a purchase without prior approval? I'm imagining that approval's done in writing via the form. Has there been any purchases prior approval? And prior to that, so the form was implemented, what was the policy? There has to be some type of credit card policy prior to that. And was it any inside purchases that were prior or anything in that nature?
No, the short answer is no, there's not been any misuse of it. The policy now is getting a policy put in place. They would call me when we first got in and say, I need the credit card for a purchase. And I would ask what the purchase was, what line item it was coming out of, and then I would okay the purchase, give them the number, and they would make it, send me a receipt. And that worked fairly well. I'd always had to chase after a receipt. Then we got to the point where they were sending me an email that I would keep on my desk until I got the receipt. And then the last iteration is that we have a form now. You must fill out the form, send it to me prior to use.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Be authorized
It's right here.
from there.
I found it.
I've got to stress
Thank you.
over and over again, they've never misused a credit card. I know we all have our feelings about a P card, but then we have 8 or 9 P cards that we'd have to keep track of rather than one credit card. And right now, I'm the clearinghouse for the credit card. I make sure that everyone adheres to what the purchases are for. But whatever you folks decide, I guess that's what the city will have to go along with in the future. But I can't say enough times, we have not had any misuse from the city side on the credit card. Department heads only order what they need. When they can't order in advance and pay for it on a PO or get billed and then send a check, we have to pay in advance with the credit card.
Yeah.
Mr. Egan, you're
Yes, there, okay.
Oh, it's not that?
A little bit.
Okay, in listening to and watching the 5 hours of the meeting the other night, one thing that I gleaned from it was, and maybe they're getting a different communication than you folks are getting, but it seems like there could be some issue with it, and there just seems to be, and this is where I kind of temper my enthusiasm about whatever policy, that there's just this disregard for policy when it comes down to folks doing certain things, and that seemed to be focused on the credit card use, at least at the meeting, But also, just for an example, but just for an example, the woman who was with Mr. Zelensky, I think she was in some purpose over something, talked about how all those, how there are rules in place. Recently, she was sent an email by her department head saying they awarded some type of work or bid to certain vendors, and it never went to her office for a bid. She never even knew that was that they awarded something. What's that?
For losing you there at the end of your last sentence.
I said, I guess, my continued concern, and again, is what they said, and they said it pretty clearly, is the policies don't get abided by, and there is no intervention with the department heads as far as any discipline, removal, anything, when these policies are just disregarded. And that was made pretty clear at that meeting, unless I was not listening at all.
It sounds like your last comment went a little bit broader than the credit card policy, but there seems to be a consistent theme in terms of the board members' concerns, and that is we have to bring the policy procedures up to a modern-day best practice level. It's not just about did you have a breakout, but do you have a procedure, do you have a policy, do you have an infrastructure in place that mitigates against risk, okay? What I will say is that I continue to grow increasingly alarmed at the number of policies and procedures that need to be rectified, strengthened, and the time frame it's taking to recruit staff or actually get it done, okay? OPM spends quite a bit of time on a daily basis working with the city of West Haven. We have Mike Malone, who's a consultant on staff to help facilitate execution, but the process continues to be very slow. So, as the chair, I think it's incumbent upon us to give you that very constructive feedback. 2, we have an audit that will be complete by Code Resnick that will identify the additional areas of risk or weakness that will need to be addressed. But I am saying to our board members, if the progress continues at this pace, there will need to be additional resources in West Haven to get these policies and procedures executed, because it will be unacceptable for anything more to happen on West Haven when they're under oversight. And we have a knowledge of these areas that have not yet been closed down. So I will let you know that OPM is looking to identify other resources to deploy to West Haven. At this point, it would require someone to be on site, really being a part of those day-to-day interactions to see to it that this work gets done. Because the staff here in 450 Capitol did not help execute in that fashion, 45 minutes away. So to Mayor and to the team, it is incumbent that you move at the quickest pace as possible. 2, we're going to get a final audit report. 3, we'll look to identify other resources so that you can execute. But it is important that these items we're talking about, credit card policy and all the other corrective action measures and then MOA action items get locked down as expeditiously as possible. So with that, if there are no other comments on the city credit card policy update, it's a perfect segue to the Code Resnick audit update, and I'm going to ask Kim Kennedy to quickly provide you with that.
Oh, Christine has her hand up, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, I don't want to delay us anxiously waiting to report from Ms. Kennison, but I did want to express gratitude that you're looking at additional resources, Madam Secretary. I think that's absolutely the right thing. I just want us to get from a posture of reacting to the latest, disclosures of concerning policies to a more proactive framework where we can work with the city to implement the kind of controls that will position it for independence. I think that's, I think there's no secret about where I'd like for this to go, but getting into a more proactive posture, armed with the information from the Code Resnick audit, is certainly front of mind from our perspective. So with that, I'll turn the table back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, absolutely. And it does seem that capacity is very important for the city to have the resources. to execute. They have day-to-day operations to manage, and then we have all of this fixing of infrastructure. So like additional resources hopefully will be helpful. I see Wilma has raised her hand. And Wilma, if you could just give us your first and last name and your role and location, please.
Good morning, my name is Wilma Petro and I am the procurement consultant that the city brought in to help them with best practices.
Thank you, Wilma. Go right ahead.
Sorry, we only have one computer on so we don't get feedback. So I have been here for 4 months and we have been diligently working on best practices. I can't say that everybody's 100%, but I can say that I have gotten an amazing amount of support from the mayor and from the finance department. There's a couple of holdouts like there would be, I think, anywhere, but we have gone through, changing the back of the PO, bids and RFPs don't go out with contracts, and department heads are realizing that they can't pick whoever they want, that there's a process that has to be maintained. So I just hate to make it sound like West Haven hasn't taken advantage of any best practices. It's absolutely a work in progress, but we have certainly in the procurement arena worked towards best practices very diligently. Most of the problem that I see is there's just so little staffing in all the areas that a lot of department heads wear too many hats and they don't always have time to meet with me or watch everything. I mean, it'd be almost impossible for Frank as the finance director to look at every single thing he needs to look at when he has about half the staff that I personally have seen in other finance departments for cities that size, and I was in Meriden and Fairfield, both are which about the same size as West Haven, and they both had double the staff rankings.
Thank you, Wilma. It's helpful on the staffing perspective, and I'm glad to hear that from the purchasing perspective that you're seeing progress and will affect the city. Christina, you have your hand up. Did you have another question? Okay. And we'll have a chance to get a more detailed update on the accounts payable, but appreciate you clearing the record. All right, Kim, I'm turning it over to you for Cohen Resnick.
Thank you, and thank you, Wilma. Thank you, Madam. So the Cohen Resnick update, we spoke with Cohen last week. They informed us that they had completed their field work as of last week, and they have begun to work on the report, the draft report. And the last report out was that the city has did not reconcile their payroll reports to their final numbers, and that was still remained to be an open item, but I was told that a number of chances and a number of extensions were provided, so this is going to delay the audit as we thought that we were already going to be in a point of already having a draft in hand, and we're not because of the field work that took place last week. But it does leave payroll and the reconciliation that is left open, so that was not resolved.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kim. The time frame that it's taking for Cohen Resnick to get their documents to complete field work is causing delays in the production of this report. So, Mayor and Frank, the payroll data that was provided was not reconciled. It was a massive data dump. You need to reconcile, take out the payroll detail and reconcile that back to the actual expenditures that were reported for the municipal CRF. So that we can avoid that being classified as not eligible. I request that get done as soon as possible. You missed the deadline, but if we could lock that down in the next day, that would be very, very much appreciated.
Madam Secretary,
I
was just going to say, this is Frank, that the data that was provided was what they had requested, an extract of the payroll registers. I was concerned, quite frankly, when an audit firm comes back and asks and says that they can't reconcile because 1 week an individual claiming 10 hours of overtime shows 10 hours of overtime on the pay card, the payroll system, and the next week claiming 8 hours of overtime, they don't understand why 20 hours of overtime is being reported on his paycheck. I mean, we can go through there, and I can go again and show that, you know, I would be more concerned if 10 hours was being claimed, but only 4 hours was being reported.
Well, we need to have an offline discussion. At this point, code reports that they do not have a fully reconciled payroll detail. So there obviously is an open item here. I'd like to prevent this, a conclusion being that you haven't given the backup to support expenditures. To the extent to which we can resolve any miscommunication would be most beneficial to you and to the city.
I will contact Ms. Kennison this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Kim, anything else on the Code Resnick audit? Obviously, as they've completed field work, they're wrapping that up, we're probably looking at a report about 30 days out.
Correct.
Questions for Kim?
So if we're talking about policies and procedures, I'm just kind of curious in this direction, right? How do you reconcile your payroll previously? Who reconciles the payroll? You have numerous departments, numerous payroll. How do you reconcile them there?
I'm sorry, I'm missing the question. So, the individual departments...
The question right, the individual department reconciles their payroll, right?
That's correct. They sign off on the time cards, they sign off on the punches. That gets sent into payroll, which is then processed through the systems. So, the individual departments take ownership for their own people.
Confusion is they're getting paid from multiple
And
sources.
to be clear, the issue here was not that phone was indicating that payroll's not being reconciled. What they are looking for is you reported X amount of payroll expenditures that you paid for out of the municipal CRF grant, and you want a report that ties back to that number. I think Frank did his due diligence and gave a full extract. Now he needs to narrow it down specifically to the payroll.
Yeah, that was my question, was how did they normally just tie everything back together? Which is...
This is a unique request, I think, based on the audit that's just, you know, obviously focusing on these expenses related to the federal dollars.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for Kim on the Code Resnick update? So we're about 30 days out, looking for report, assuming they get the documentation needed from what Haven today. All right, so we're going to turn to the Board of Education fiscal 2023 recommended budget. The schools are on break. We looked at a full report from the Board of Education in March, but Julian is going to give us a preliminary update. Julian?
Yes, very briefly. The Board of Ed did adopt a budget on January 18th, which would then go to the city to be incorporated into the mayor's recommended budget. The request, as you see in the very brief summary that was provided, the request from the general fund is level funding. So that has not changed in several years. It remains at $89.96 million, which has been the request and the appropriation out of the general fund for education going back at least to 2019. And it's not much different from even a couple of years prior to that. This is the second year that we've received an all funds summary from the Board of Ed so that we can see what resources are available in addition to the general fund, and it provides a little bit of clarity on how the Board of Education is absorbing some operational cost increases through the use of these other resources. You can see that there are some summary tables on the second page of the overview document that show the overall expenditure requirements of the Board of Ed are projected to be $106 million next year, with the difference between that total and the general fund request being made up through a handful of grant resources. So we have the Board of Ed coming back in March to present and respond to any questions. If the board or subcommittee members have any questions that they would like to submit in advance, that would be helpful, and then we can ensure that the staff come back with the information in hand, prepared to respond. I've listed on the second page of the brief memo I sent out some suggested questions or suggested requests for additional information. But if you have any further questions or requests, please get them to me and I'll make sure that they get to the Board of Ed. And then the full city budget is expected to be released. I believe the mayor's recommended it is due on March 17th or 18th, or thereabouts.
17th.
And that's all I have for this item.
The 17th, Julian.
17th.
Great, thank you. Any questions or feedback for Julian? Any other thoughts on items we'd like the board to be prepared to speak to in March? I would ask for some clarification on the other funding sources and how much of that might be temporary federal funds, the extent to which they are or not recovering recurring expenses. Just want to have an eye towards what the future years look like when those dollars expire. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, this is Tom Hamilton. I was going to make the same comment, interested in knowing that the ESSER funds and the ARPA funds, what the Board of Ed city plan is to make those up when those go away. Because it looks like it's 2.2 million of that $5 million increase. Looks like it's probably non-recurring if I'm interpreting this memo correctly.
Anyone else at Board of Ed recommended budget? Okay. We will turn to the MOA action plan. The city is going to provide an update on the 4 MOA action plans as well as the corrective action plan. And the first one is human resources, the personnel department. Mayor will turn it.
We have Pam Alvino, who is our Director of Personnel. She's just coming over to the phone now, Madam Secretary.
Good morning. Good to be with you all, and good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about the work that this team has been involved in, and I'm happy to be a part of it. It is a challenge, I must say, and to address the work that has been done in terms of identifying the development of the personnel organization and the needs and the wants and the asks of that department has been a big focus for me in the 4 months I've been with this organization. To address, I guess, starting with the action plan in terms of restructuring the HR personnel organization. I'm sorry, I can't get used to calling it personnel. My lifelong experiences have always addressed it as human resources, so I'm going to slip up here and there. But there has been considerable progress made in those action items, 1.1, 1.6, and I could start from the top. The payroll administration outsourcing of payroll specifically with ADP. That had been completed. We are using the ADP service and other extraneous elements of their portals and so forth within the department. There is still other usage we have yet to activate, but we're aggressively trying to move through that, specifically with the recruiting aspect, and we've made significant progress there. The benefits administration position, which is combined with payroll, that position had been filled. The position of, my position specifically was filled early, last year, towards the end of the year. We created and posted and have interviewed for the new position of generalist without much success at all, to be very frank. I think my observation has been, in terms of the 4 individuals we interviewed, it is very difficult to find a skill set that marries both personnel generalist capabilities with a developed capability to be a backup to process payroll and work within the ADP system. It's frankly, I'm not able to find a candidate who can meet both of those skill sets. And I propose that we divide the skill set and actually reinstitute the position, a dedicated position for a payroll specialist, which we can talk about a little later on. Moving on to...
I'm in agreement.
Yeah. The payroll is a complex one. We are processing 7 different collective bargaining units with, some very different fringes and benefits going along with that. 7 different time and attendance keepers who have varying degrees of their own capability. So there is correction that the benefits payroll person needs to do on a regular basis. So intensive is the word for it. It's a time-intensive process and leaves the individual with very little time to even devote for that benefits administration component of her job description. So that is been my observation, and I think it's not an exaggerated one. Any questions? Can I move on to action item 2, benefits administration?
Yeah, maybe just have one clarifying question. Are you recommending 2 additional headcount in order to fulfill the action items under also number 1, so basically between number 1.6 and 1.7, are we saying we need 2 additional FTEs?
I would say we need to add a position for a payroll specialist.
Okay.
And we would keep the incumbent in, that position, the incumbent who holds a position of benefits administration to be focused on benefits administration and as serve as a backup for the full-time benefits payroll specialist.
Great. And Mayor Rusty, are we building this additional position into your fiscal 23 budget as well as in your fiscal 22 projections to support your new director's observations?
Okay, so I just got some of this information when the packet came out for the MARB, and Frank actually still has the budget and is putting it together. So I do it in the final stages, if you will, go through, but I do realize, that, again, when we first came here, we had to cut, and a lot of staffing went out the door, so I do agree that it, has to be put back in, as we were talking about best practices. So I'm not against it, I just haven't seen the budget, and again, just learned about this when this packet came out before this meeting.
But that head is included in the 23 budget, Madam Secretary.
Excellent. The mayor supports the budget bill, then we will have adequate resources. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Oldsby. Any other questions on number 1, section 1 of the plan? Otherwise, go to number 2.
Okay, under benefits administration, the body of work under the wellness program, expanding and enhancing the state health partnership, health enhancements program, is one that I think we can further develop once the benefits administrator can devote more time to this. But what, in the meantime, in the time I've been here, we've used the newsletters, the online education components that is inherent within the HEP program. We promote them through the organization. We display posters at certain times of the year for various issues addressing healthcare and wellness. And any changes to the program is communicated throughout. Again, I would certainly like to see, now that the more organizations are opening up, that certainly on-site education can be conducted, in the coming, soon, within the coming 6 months. So to address other key topics around wellness, we certainly would want to take advantage of that. Any other, I'll move on to the next area, 3.1. And this section actually addresses the audit remarks and recommendations from HRCG that was conducted before I joined the organization. And there had been progress made. I have, for myself, audited these areas as well, beginning with the I-9 forms, which were inappropriately filed within personnel files, have been separated, and they are within their own repository binders and are under secure location. The personnel files themselves, frankly, I don't know where they existed, but apparently they weren't secured as they should have been. They are now secured under lock and key in a separate office under my scrutiny as well. The files themselves, the personnel files, have been audited to ensure that they contain what should be contained in a personnel employee file, removing any medical, family leave, workers' comp, other related wage information that should not be included in a personnel file that has been extracted. For instance, as an example, I maintain the FML files. I have them in my office separately, and I feel quite confident that the files contain what they legally should contain. I'll move on to enhancing recruitment efforts, and I saw, certainly with having to have that Workforce Now ADP recruiting portal, there was, this low-hanging fruit and utilization that could be made from having that portal, and moved on to ensuring that it's used as we could use it with the staffing that we have. And that is that to link ADP recruitment with Indeed. The linkage is secured. The linkage with our website, City of West Haven website, in terms of posting jobs directly through ADP, direct linkage to our website, direct linkage to ADP, so it is a one-stop shop and it saves on a whole lot of time. So that is in place. Additionally, working with department heads and their staffing needs, there has been more advertising done in terms of attracting the qualified candidates for our openings that we have, using CCM, using association websites as well. So we have that direct linkage as well, and could do that more efficiently now that we have the ADP workforce portal, a recruiting portal in place. I think I could also talk about how in utilizing that recruiting portal, we've customized what they call knockout questions or elimination questions for each position as applicants apply for these openings, that they are required to go and answer these specific questions, so we can weed out the non-qualified applicants without having to go through hundreds of resumes.
Excellent.
Good. Updating hire and offer letters, much of that, when I came on board, had been accomplished, other than just tweaking some verbiage in letters and I guess using my own style, and I'm still working on that as well. But I can confidently say that we are in compliance in what should be included in an offer letter and provide the adequate information for a candidate to assess an offer. They'll have the policies and procedures, they'll have a copy of one of 7 collective bargaining union agreements and so forth, and the disclosures are intact and included as well. I'll move on to exit interviews. I have a template that I put together for an exit interview, and whenever possible, as long as the employee gave some notice, I reach out to exiting employees and schedule a discussion with them and ask them, it's not, if they would voluntarily like to participate in a questionnaire. So far, 1 or 2 of them have just basically volunteered to say that they would just like to restrict it to I'm leaving because of salary. And those were the 2 exit interviews I've conducted so far. It's been a salary decision, and they would like to refrain from commenting on any other aspects of their employment with the city. Labor relations strategies, and I added that component of this area as I walked into the organization and come from a considerable labor background going back to the mid-'80s, that this is, I think, a culture that has developed where there is a weakening, I think, of management rights across bargaining units. There's been a lot of history with past practices and memorandums of agreement to resolve issues. And it has been very much developed in the city of West Haven. And because of this, I think it's takes a bit more time to reinforce contracts, management rights, because of that weakening. I have spent a considerable portion of my time in grievance activity, labor charges, mediation meetings, and I put this component in there because of the fact that there is a very strong issue of, I think, a need to reinforce management rights. We have some negotiations coming up in the next year, and I hope to be able to work on that internally and externally with our labor council. Going on to record management and compliance. EEO affirmative action statements, that has all been updated. It is complete where it should be in terms of applications, our on-site applications, our ADP portal, that's all in place. Fair Credit Reporting Act forms are also incorporated as well. The last part of that section, sexual harassment training. There is an online training program in place. We have collected and we continue to audit the certificates that employees have provided. I think there's some missing certificates that we need to run down, but new hires are made aware in their offer letter that this is a requirement to complete within the first couple months of their hire. Okay, moving on to Part B, Strategic Operations Plan. I think I frankly already addressed the expansion of the recruiting portal and force. We can actually expand on that functionality by directing resumes directly to the hiring manager. That's actually being considered. I'm not sure if that's the best plan of attack, but there is that additional functionality within ADP. Launching ADP version 2 of time and attendance, so we reactivated the ability for employees to punch in from their phone or computer, and limited the radius that they can do that, so they're doing it very close to work within, very respective distance of their actual workplace. So that's in place right now. And I think the last section is, one of the last sections is addressing organizational development, which is a body of work that hasn't been implemented in this organization and requires, I've requested additional headcount to, number one, develop a standardized performance assessment process and program for our employees. Two, for the mayor and her staff, establish a succession planning framework and process to identify key positions, look at knowledge transfer, succession planning in terms of what is available for talent, bench strength talent within the organization. I'd like to formalize an onboarding program with employees entering in the organization. I do that on an informal basis, and I meet with new hires, the ones that I've brought on in the last few months. So I make it a point to check in with the employee on a regular basis. And the other element of in-service training and professional development, conduct assessment of training needs throughout the organization. I think certainly there's supervisory skills training that's needed for our workforce in supervisory and management positions, and actually another example might be project management skills as well. So this is a body of work. It's expansive. I think it helps grow the culture, develop the culture of the organization, and it's it's an enterprise-wide initiative that I'd like to see rolled out in the next year, not sooner. Goals and objectives for my department. This is something in process. There is, I could say, there is little to no in-department procedures that are documented. And we need to do that. I need to work on that, and that's something I'll work on over the next few months. Along with that is really to update on personnel policies and procedures that every employee receives within a handbook, and just to do an audit and review of that document would be something I'd be working on in the next few months. I would like to, in closing, review, I think you all have the document of recruiting actions, and that's budget. These are for budgeted vacancies. and postings that have occurred in the last few months. So in finance, there's been considerable progress made. We have a final candidate who has accepted an offer for the purchasing director. Anticipated start date will be March 21st, if not sooner. I think that's a key position that is, we're moving on. And in the last few months, there has been a lot of activity and interviews across all areas, but this is one that we're very happy we were able to fill this soon. Going back to finance as well, just after I joined the organization, we filled the accounts payable position internally. We will have a new hire for the junior financial analyst role. That's an external hire. Start date is for March 7th. And then, as I said, the procurement director. Once the procurement director is on board, we will repost the position for the purchasing specialist. And given the number of resumes received for purchasing when the director position was posted, I think we can safely say that we could probably fill that position by May 1st, if not sooner. Under tax collection, we had an external candidate accept the offer for tax manager. That candidate is coming into the organization as of March 7th. Under planning and zoning, filled the position for zoning inspector, externally accepted by a candidate who came in from New Haven. She started January 10th. We have an offer pending for an assistant building official. Interviewed that candidate just last week, and I think we're going to go forward with an offer for that position, and that has been an open position for quite a while. Under
if we may just interrupt you for a moment, given we have 5 minutes left, I'm going to just ask you to focus in on the personnel and labor relations since you covered the finance progress, and the last piece that's directly related would be the personnel in the house, and then I want to give it.
Certainly, and I think I addressed this early on. The personnel generalist is a position that was posted to marry the need to have a backup for payroll. Interviews, I conducted 4 interviews unsuccessfully. No strong candidate has been identified. But I think if we are able to separate those 2 skill sets and then just move forward with a personnel generalist, having generalist background, I think I'll have more success in being able to find a candidate for that position.
Excellent. First of all, I just want to say welcome to the team and thank you for your report out today. I appreciate your coming in and getting up to speed rather quickly. And it sounds like you're a sharp person on the team, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. With respect to the finance department, excellent news on the securing of procurement director. I just wanted to recommend that you obviously would probably like that procurement director to help select the final candidate, but it would be helpful for you to repost the job and have resumes and applications ready for when they walk through the door. I recommend not wait to reposting until March, but get it reposted.
Yeah, that is my plan.
On the personnel labor relations, Mayor will leave it to you to give us an update of the full board as to whether or not you're supporting the plan that the Human Resources Director has put forward so that she can move forward with reposting that personnel generalist with just the general duties. And obviously we have to address the payroll specialist new position separately, but I'd like to see that happen promptly. So you have the resources in place to act as Other than that, I'll open it up for questions from the rest of our subcommittee members. Or comments? That you get?
Yeah, I'd like to definitely, I just wanted to make sure the MARB members didn't have one before me. I want to commend Pam for onboarding in her short, 4 months, everything that she has observed, took down in this plan, and also did, extensive audits of all of the files. Everything that I'm hearing today is actually music to my ears. So thank you so much for digging in, Pam, and doing this work and keep up the good work, please.
I plan to, thank you.
Any other subcommittee members? Well, with that, we have reached our stopping point for today. We do have a number of other updates that will continue our full board meeting and also in our next subcommittee meeting for MARB. If there are any specific questions that you have, you can always follow up with Julian. So with that, any questions, Christine?
So I joined the meeting a few minutes late, and I believe it was after the minutes were approved. If I were present at the time, I would have voted to accept the minutes of correction. Thank you.
Okay, I will correct that for the record. Very good. Is there any other discussion, other business that anyone wants to raise before we do a quick motion to adjourn? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for our continued work with Haven. We have some follow-up work to do on the credit card policy as well as ensuring we have the final documentation for Code Resnick, but I'm very thankful for the human resources and staffing plan update. We're going to continue to push forward, and our goal here again is to get you to strength. You've made progress from a balancing of your budget and your book perspective. Now we need that infrastructure to be resilient and strong. So we look forward to that continued work. And with that, I will gladly accept the motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Second. Excellent. All right, I know we're all in favor. Let's see if by the smiles on your faces, take care, everyone, see you soon. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, bye.